Well, hi there. It's Jonathan Foust, and this is my webcast, and I am so glad you're here. We got a lot to explore. Another talk from the archives. I am still at an undisclosed location on Cape Cod, and we're going to be exploring part two of how focus can transform your life. But before we do that, some announcements, a little centering to help kind of prepare for this following talk. Thank you to the Insight Meditation community of Washington for streaming this. Thank you to our producer, Glenn Harrison, for making it possible. Thank you to Rita Moran, our mindful movement leader, who is on the road traveling this month, but you can get her links on my Facebook page on my website. Um, Again, I've got a newsletter weekly, bi-monthly, exploring stuff that I do, photography, talks, summaries, upcoming events. And finally, this is all offered in the spirit of generosity, in the spirit of dana. That is to say, no one is to be denied access to the practices and teachings, which I find to be a really compelling way of offering this. Comes from a real sense of joy, a real sense of how these practices have changed my life. And it's really designed so that anyone who's interested will not be denied access. At the same time, if you feel like supporting this, thank you so much. There are expenses that go into getting these talks out. Now, like well over 600 talks, which is a little frightening, actually. Alrighty, let's dive in. We're going to be exploring a little bit on concentration, and I'd like to share with you one of my favorite techniques of all time for cultivating a greater sense of concentration and absorption and preparing for meditation. So, um, we've got about 13 minutes to explore this centering before our talk. So you might like to first reach your arms up overhead, stretch up to the left side, the right side. Ooh, let out any sounds, open your jaw wide, stick your tongue out all the way if you like. Now, if you would, bring your hands right about at face level and then close your eyes. Feel the breath and let your attention flow into the palms, into the thumbs and fingers. Maybe a little bit of strain. We're going to be holding the hands for a little while and then doing a slow motion meditation. But first, bring your awareness inside the thumbs and relax your thumbs. Bring your awareness inside the fingers. Relax the fingers. Feel the backs of the hands. Feel the palms from the inside out. Can you feel or imagine the space between your thumbs and your index fingers? Can you imagine the space between each of your fingers? And now, if you would imagine that if someone was watching you, they could barely perceive movement. And you're going to begin in a few moments an ultra slow motion descent of the hands down toward your lap. Again, imagine that if someone was watching you, they could barely perceive movement and feel the micro movements of the hands as they flow through space. The object of your focus is this felt sense of the hands as they glide through space down toward your lap. Wherever you find your hands, whether they're at rest, or maybe if they're still in transit, sense if you can keep your attention in this feeling tone or the felt sense in the palms and fingers and thumbs and the backs of the hands. Can you feel the effect or the imprint of focusing your attention this way? Let's continue this deepening into the sense of the here and now. Feel the forehead smooth. Soften the muscles around the eyes. Relax your tongue. Let your tongue fill your lower jaw. And feel from the inside out the muscles of the face, the muscles of the jaw. What could relax or soften or let go? Tracking any felt shift of deepening relaxation. Feel the space inside your throat. And sensing from the inside out as you feel the weight, the volume, the length of your arms, down through the elbows, down through the wrists, and sensing again down into the hands, palms, backs of the hands, fingers and thumbs, sensing any pulse or tingling, vibration, subtle energy here. Could you soften through your lower back and down through the belly and down through the floor of the pelvis? And can you sense from the inside out, down from the hip joints, down through the knees, down through the ankles, the tops of the feet and the toes, the soles of the feet and the heels, and from the crown of the head down to the soles of the feet? Is there anything right now that could soften or relax or let go? You may notice how the more you relax, the more you feel, the more relaxation opens you into this awareness of aliveness, noticing where you feel pulse or tingling or vibration or movement. And I'd like to suggest one of three anchors or focal points that you might intuitively select. One might be your breath, the sense of the breath on the inside. Another alternative might be noticing the sound vibrations. And a third alternative is this feeling tone in the palms, the felt sense of the hands. And for this next about 4 minutes, select one of these anchors, breath or sound or the felt sense of the hands, and sense what it's like to sustain your attention here. When the mind naturally wanders away, gently escort your attention back to the breath, to sound vibration, or to the felt sense in the palms. An important part of this practice is to notice when your mind has wandered. And in that moment, there's this spark of awakening. Once again, you are here. You've arrived. And you might take your time to bring your attention back to your anchor, to breath, sound of the palms. Relax, re arrive. And then again, just track the experience on the inside. You might explore now in this remaining minute or so to shift from your practice of doing to a practice of being. Is it possible to let all technique fall away and simply to relax in presence? Nothing to do, nowhere to go. What happens when you allow yourself just simply to rest in the here and now? What do you feel? What do you notice? And as you're ready, you might gently begin to deepen your breath. Let your body begin to move or shift in any way that feels good for you as you begin your transition. Welcome back. Some of the most successful people on the planet are incredibly focused. They stay focused on what's most important and they get things done. That being said, some of the most miserable people on the planet are incredibly focused. So, focus or concentration is an incredible tool, but not necessarily a tool that leads to happiness. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Some of the strategies for using focus, in particular, focusing on the interior, interoperception, and focusing on your outer world, exteroperception. So, I think you'll find the following talk helpful because it's about bringing attention to what's happening inside, how you're responding to life, but also holding attention on the outside. What's happening on the outside, what's most important in your life, and how to sustain attention, vigor, focus on what's most important to you. I hope you find the following talk helpful. This is part 2 on how focus can transform your life. Enjoy. Here's a classic little Dharma story. An oldie but goodie. It's the story of a meditation master, let's say way, way back when, who is rigorously working with his very, very young students. The whole idea here is to train them to pay attention to what's happening. So whenever they're doing their studies, he stands over them quite imperiously and says, when you read, read. Again and again, that's sort of his mantra. When you read, read. And when they have their simple meals in the monastery, he stands over them, walks around as they're eating and says, when you eat, eat. When you eat, eat. And this is pretty much a very integral part of the training. When you read, read. When you eat, eat. As the story goes, some of the students were hungry one night. They decided to break into the kitchen and see if they could find something to eat. And there they find their master sitting at the table, eating a bowl of rice and reading the newspaper. They stand around him, knowing they don't have to say anything because they got him busted. He stops, he looks each of the students in the eye, and he says, when you eat and read, eat and read. Last talk, I talked about focus and concentration and shared some strategies for training your mind to become more aware of moment-to-moment focus on an object. And the truth is, I got so carried away in that talk, I only got halfway through the talk. So I'd like to carry on here. And I hope you find this helpful because many people find that meditation is really hard. Some say it's not. You may have seen some of those ads in the past saying that if you buy this audio CD, within 30 seconds you'll be meditating like a monk who's been meditating for 30 years. I bought one of those CDs, and that's not true. There is some interesting technology of working with dual binaural beats and so forth that can definitely help you and support you in sort of arriving in present moment awareness, but it takes some training. There are those who say how ultimately meditation is about effortlessness, and that's true. Sometimes it is about effortlessness. Sometimes you enter into a really, really cool flow where it's all happening by itself and you're allowing it to happen and it's all unfolding. But another part of the training is about learning how to pay attention when it's not so easy. This is where it's safe to say, I think, that meditation is not a walk in the park. Number one, undigested material comes up. As you're cultivating moment-to-moment awareness, all the unhealed, unfelt, unseen parts within, they just come up to the surface as part of the natural kind of purgative process of meditation. But in terms of focus and concentration, there are times when it's not easy. The mind is scattered. The mind's, you're over-emotional. You just can't pay attention. And this is where you develop willpower, where you develop resilience, where you develop kind of grit in your practice. And the upside of developing your powers of concentration can be enormously powerful. Concentration helps you to set the stage for insight, for mindfulness. It sets the stage for wisdom and compassion, and ultimately, it sets the stage for liberation or for true freedom. So I'd like to talk a little bit about, as I usually do, in 4 parts. Part 1, how a focused mind is a powerful mind. Second are some strategies for inner focus, for training attention on your inner world. In part 3, I'll talk a little bit about some of the strategies for outer focus on how to sustain attention on what's most important to you. And in part 4, how focus and concentration can truly set the stage for awakening, liberation, enlightenment, if you will. So there are some amazing stories of focus out there. people who have given their lives to particular professions where they really have to pay attention. A good friend of mine back in my ashram days decided he wanted to become a pilot. And specifically, he wanted to become a jet pilot. He didn't have any training, but he invested his time and his fortune into being a pilot of large planes. And the first job he found was being a pilot for FedEx or UPS. One of those. I think he was flying into South America, and he said that the job was hours of boredom punctuated by minutes of sheer terror. The takeoff and landings in particular. Everything has to be perfect. Everything has to be aligned. If you make one mistake, grave consequences. And every move he would make was recorded and reviewed. So he was responsible for the crew, he was responsible for the complexity of the aircraft. He had to focus and pay attention. A good friend worked as an anesthesiologist, and I just got a sense of what it's like to literally be holding someone's life in your hands, of matching the technical aspects of anesthesia with the particular condition of the patient, and then matching it perfectly. And again, the consequences of slipping up are grave, literally, potentially. When I think of someone who's a surgeon who's gone through 4 years of college, through med school, through up to 7 years of training in order to perform these incredibly complex surgeries, it really speaks to what's possible with the mind when you're concentrated. And I would imagine that in your job, in your life, there are aspects that absolutely require laser-like focus. Even driving a car or riding a bike, if you lose focus and concentration, you're in danger. So it's a worthy skill to develop. And I've noticed that it's something that you can lose if you don't cultivate it. When I was a kid, my dad used to always turn on the Today Show in the morning while we were getting breakfast. And he would say, I just want to make sure the world is still out there. And now we check to make sure the world is still out there approximately every 12 minutes. That's the average time that someone will check their phone or some device. Often, as soon as we wake up, we'll reach for our phone just to make sure the world is still out there, or just to soothe our particular anxiety. And maybe you've noticed that your attention span is not what it used to be. There's a book, it's called The Shallows, which is a study of what has happened through the impact of social media. And here's an interesting section of that book. Immersing myself in a book or a lengthy article used to be easy. My mind would get caught up in the narrative or the turns of an argument, and I'd spend hours strolling through long stretches of prose. That's rarely the case anymore. Now my concentration often starts to drift after 2 or 3 pages. I get fidgety, I lose the thread, I begin looking for something else to do. I feel as if I'm always dragging my wayward brain back to the text. The deep reading that used to come naturally has now become a struggle. Can you relate? I actually found some relief in reading that, just knowing I'm not the only one. My attention span has really taken a hit. And I know that I'm not alone in this. There's an article from The Guardian that said that when you're distracted over a long period of time, your IQ will drop 10 points. And that constant interruptions can have the same effect as sleep loss. They did a study with 1,000 participants, and half of them said they always respond to email immediately, and 21% they would interrupt a meeting in order to respond to a prompt of a text or an email. So, at least in this study, people were interrupted approximately every 8 minutes. So in an 8-hour day, that's 60 interruptions. And the result of this is something called continuous partial attention. And when you are operating under continuous partial attention, there is a corresponding increase in stress hormones. There is a corresponding increase in addictive behavior. And we're all caught in this myth of multitasking, this illusion that we can do multiple things at the same time and be effective. And that is pretty much blown out of the water. It's far better to do one thing at a time than to fracture your attention. And I'll talk a little bit about some strategies as to how to do that. So if you're suffering from poor concentration, it might have physical roots. There could be something having to do with ADHD. If you have trouble sleeping, anything with sleep apnea absolutely can affect your concentration. There's depression or thyroid issues or a flu or some infection. It's going to affect your capacity to hold attention on one thing. It may have a mental or emotional component as well. You may be undergoing a lot of stress, or if you're deeply fatigued, if there's any trauma kind of operating under the surface, or maybe just habits of how you pay attention. All of that is going to affect your capacity to concentrate in meditation and in the rest of your life. Our culture is definitely gotten more and more distracted. If you've seen the movie The Social Dilemma, it goes into this in detail, this science of how your attention is manipulated. How you are manipulated to pull your attention away from what you're doing to get your eyeballs and focus on something else. And I have to say, there's a certain irony that this message would be in the form of a movie, because no one would read the book. So when I think of our age of bumper sticker politics, how fractured our attention is, how easily manipulated our attention is now, all the more reason to slow down and explore how you can develop more one-pointed, focused attention in your life. It's like balance. Unless you use your sense of balance, you're going to lose it. And so, how do you develop more focus and more attention? I'm not a naturally concentrated person. It's not my forte. I've spent a lot of time in my practice making peace with my inability to get as focused as I would like to be. I would like to think that with an active meditation practice since I was 15 and living in an ashram, leading retreats, taking retreats, doing intensive practice, I'd be a more focused kind of guy. But I'm not. I like to think of meditation as three parts. The first is focus, this willful gathering of attention in the here and now, and then flow, like opening up to what's changing and how you're relating to it, and then opening into this whole sense of letting go or letting be, like sort of arriving and resting in presence. And I've noticed, given my temperament, I kind of move more quickly to the be aware of the flow mode. But I've also noticed that when I take the time to cultivate more one-pointed attention in my practice and in my life, it's always beneficial, always beneficial. And I've noticed that what supports me in getting more concentrated is removing distractions. When I'm on a retreat where my phone is tucked away, it's a lot easier. But nonetheless, sometimes in my regular everyday practice, sometimes I do drop in. Sometimes I do get absorbed in that moment-to-moment awareness of what's happening. Sometimes I drop in deeper and deeper to the sense of the here and now. Sometimes I feel time slow down, and sometimes I really get that there's nothing outside of of this moment. There's nothing outside of here and now. And usually when I kind of get into that beautiful zone, it's usually not just focused attention that gets me there, but the conditions that support focus and support concentration. And I've come to recognize for myself, as I've come to recognize my own makeup, my own tendencies, that setting the stage is particularly helpful for me. Setting the foundation. And the foundation for me is around releasing deep-seated tension, conscious relaxation, and then some strategies for continuing to point the attention inward. So usually for me, that's around movement, relaxation, and then reminders. So let me share a little practice with you. If you're up for it, we'll take a couple minutes, and you can try this on for yourself. So the whole idea of movement is you're sort of raising energy and then moving into relaxation to let it settle. So if you've meditated with me at all, you've done this. So if you like, you can take your hands and just begin shaking out your hands. This is optional. You don't have to do this. And if you have your eyes closed, no one can see you. But also, if you're listening to this on headphones and there's anyone else in the room, this will be very entertaining for them to watch. So you can begin to deepen your breath, let the shaking get a little more vigorous. Full, long, deep breath, and then reach your arms up overhead. Stretch your arms up and just hold them there. And as you hold your arms up overhead, you're going to feel sensations beginning to build. It may feel unpleasant. It may feel tingling. You may feel pulse. And then close your eyes. And then very slowly now, imagine that if someone was watching you, they could barely perceive movement, and let your hands begin an ultra slow motion flow down toward your lap. Let all of your focus and concentration be on the micro movements of your hands as they flow through space. And notice the effect on the mind. Relax and feel. And no matter where your hands are, whether they come to rest or whether they're still in transit, notice the feeling inside. Now I'd like to share just a few of these reminders. We'll just try them on over the next few minutes, letting your attention now move to your breath, effortless breath. And you might, on the in-breath, on the next in-breath, just count 1. On the next in-breath, counting 2. And continuing to count to 5. Just do a few rounds, each in-breath counting to 5. And if you would, you can explore the following question. Is the length of this inhalation any different than the length of the inhalation in the breath preceding? Exploring the next question. Where do you feel the breath the most predominant on the inside right now? If your mind has wandered, is it possible to celebrate the awakening and guide your attention back to your breath, continuing for the next, say, 30 seconds? you like, you can release the breath and feel free to open your eyes, or you can remain with them closed. So how do you get more focused in meditation? Well, there are a few things that I find helpful. The first is the power of simplicity, and that is primarily around removing what might distract you. If you're a chronic phone checker, you might tuck your phone away. You might create a place where you sit on a regular basis that's very, very simple and easy. Number one, you'll have a sense of like associating a quality of good feeling about it. But also you're going to be in a space where you won't be tempted to distract yourself. Part of the simplicity for me is to kind of create a ritual where I meditate before anything else. I'll kind of get up, I'll use the bathroom, and then I'll do my practice before my mind starts ramping up into the day. So the power of simplicity. And what's helpful for me, and you might consider as a way of creating the conditions that will support you in your practice, is to consider starting your meditation with some movement. Now, you may have noticed for yourself that when you sit after movement, it's a little bit easier. But think in terms of some practices that will sort of awaken energy and then allow your energy to settle. If you have any favorite yoga postures that you like to do, or you can try that shaking, maybe do that a little bit longer. You can just have the arms up overhead and do a little breath and movement, anything that's going to help you to sort of wake up the energy and let it settle. The other technique I find that really helps me to cultivate a greater sense of absorption is slow motion movement. So the classic, which I love to do, and which of course I lead all the time if you've sat with me, is this idea of either having your arms way up overhead or even just in front of your face. And then you close your eyes and you imagine that if someone was watching you, they could barely perceive movement. And the anchor, the focus of your attention is on this ultra slow motion movement of the hands. What you may find is that by focusing on the anchor of slow motion movement, because it's sensation, it's a little bit easier for the mind to track, and it can cultivate a sense of absorption, a sense of the attention moving from out there to more and more inside. So that's one of my go-tos. There's an interesting practice which I've played with years and years and years ago called Kumnai, where you can take any simple little movement and just slow it down. One thing I'll do sometimes is I'll just bring my shoulders up to my ears. You might even try this if you bring your shoulders up to your ears. And then imagine if someone was watching you, they could barely perceive movement. Let your shoulders do this ultra slow motion descent. And again, the more you focus on sensation, the more you'll naturally find awareness becoming more and more absorbed, more and more drawn inward, and helping you to set the stage for the subtlety of your meditation practice. Conscious relaxation, also very, very helpful. And again, in many ways I'm stating the obvious, but a couple key areas to relax, I find, if you relax your tongue, let your tongue fill your lower jaw, there's a whole gangly of muscles that start to soften and relax, relaxing the root of your tongue down into your throat, to feel your palms from the inside, to feel the soles and the heels from the inside. Again, you're setting the stage for concentration. The 3 pointers for the breath that I find helpful is at times to count the breath from 1 to 5. It's just a nice way to start. And again, for myself personally, I don't count the breath all the way through, but I'll count the breath for a while, sometimes when I feel like I need it. When you count the breath, you'll notice that the mind wanders and you have to come back and it'll train your attention to be here. One of the techniques that I really like is to ask myself, is this next in-breath shorter or longer than the in-breath preceding? And again, just by tracking that question, it'll absorb your attention more inwardly. I've also played on long retreats. Is the next in-breath shorter or longer than the in-breath preceding the last in-breath? That gets a little complex, but it'll absorb your attention because you're paying attention on purpose. So the first question, counting breath. The second, in-breath compared to the in-breath preceding. And the third is, where exactly do I feel this breath on the inside? And finally, in concentration practice, there is this built-in reflex of self-judgment. And when you lose concentration, of course, the mind is going to go into comparing and judging. You can reframe that by actually making that moment of wakefulness pleasurable. To acknowledge the mind for coming back, to thank it, to bring in a little mild celebration. You are awake. And then look for the pleasure on the return. Relax. Relax your tongue, the palms of the hands, the soles of the feet, the belly, and take some time to feel that pleasure in re-arriving. It can be a really beautiful way to allow yourself to find more and more pleasure in the concentration, because concentration is actually, when you're there, a very, very pleasurable place to be. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So when the mind wanders, take your time. You don't have to rush back to your anchor. Acknowledge, feel a little bit of gratitude, appreciate the mind. Sense some of these touch points where you can soften. And then from that place, come back to your anchor. Now, when you're not doing formal sitting practice and you want to cultivate more mindful moments during the day, another option, another strategy is to consciously choose segments where you're going to be ultra focused. The easiest is in the shower. When you take a shower, how aware can you be of each body part? How aware can you be of all the senses? There's the classic washing dishes meditation. When you're doing the dishes or loading the dishwasher, how much can you make that a concentration and flow practice where you're aware of all the senses, how your body's moving, and of course the dishes get done that way. When you're listening to someone, how intimately can you really listen? When you eat. And one of the greatest techniques that I know of for cultivating the sense of here and now is to slow down. As the story goes, when you slow down, the more you slow down, the more you notice. Back in my ashram days, there was someone who was begging his parents to come and visit. He was so excited about being in the community, and they never did. We were having a retreat, a personal retreat just for the ashram residents, and we were doing walking meditation. So all of us back in those days, we wore white when we were practicing. So there were about 300 people all doing walking meditation outside wearing white, walking ultra slow, which happened to be the moment his parents chose to surprise him by visiting. And I just can't imagine what it was like for them to go see their little boy who's so excited to be living in this spiritual community and drive up and see 300 people in white walking like zombies. But slowing down can be so helpful. And to also recognize that there are times when you can focus and concentrate better than others. For me, the best times of day for concentration practice are first thing in the morning. The best conditions for me are after I exercise or do some conscious movement. So developing concentration internally absolutely can bleed into the rest of your life. The more you develop that sense of one-pointed attention, the more you'll find wherever you apply it, that sense of concentration can come through. And there's a story about Swami Vivekananda. Now, these stories about spiritual teachers, they tend to get mythologized, they tend to get amplified. There's a little bit of hero worship here, but still a good story. Once during his visit to Chicago, Swami Vivekananda was taking a stroll on the banks of a river. There he saw some young boys with an air gun trying to shoot at eggshells floating in the river. As the shells rolled up and down on the choppy water, the boys could not hit them. None of the boys hit an eggshell despite trying many times. Swami Vivekananda was watching their game with keen interest. Seeing this, the boys called out to him, "You've been watching us this whole time. Do you want to give it a try?" Swami Vivekananda smiled and said that he would like to give it a try. Taking the air gun in his hand, he aimed at the eggshells and concentrated on the target for a long time. Then he fired the gun 12 times and hit an eggshell each time. Well, the boys were awestruck seeing Swamiji's skill and asked, "Well, how could you do that? Have you had a lot of shooting practice?" And Swamiji laughed and said, "No, I've never practiced shooting." And the boys were confused. "Well, then how did you shoot so well?" Swami Vivekananda replied, "Well, let me tell you a secret. Whatever you do, concentrate all of your attention on it. Think of nothing else. If you are shooting, keep your mind only on the target, and your aim will not fail. Concentration can work wonders. Even when you're studying, think only of the lesson at hand, and you will be able to remember what you study." So, this capacity for willful concentration that you do internally can absolutely express itself fully in your life. And in that same way, when you're looking to cultivate more concentration in your life, it reminds me of growing up in the Pennsylvania Dutch country with the Amish and the Mennonites and their buggies. The horses, which would go along sides of highways, were pretty placid. I could never understand why, with all the cars and trucks screaming by. Well, the secret was blinders. Have you ever seen the horses? Quite often they'll wear blinders where their eyes can't wander to the left and right. It keeps your attention focused. And even if you just cup your eyes when you're reading or focusing, you'll be able to keep your attention on what's in front of you. So I find just having a clear desk, making sure visually I'm not distracted, will help me to kind of focus a little more. Even as I was writing this talk, the technique which I use, which I've shared before, it's really kind of twofold. One of them is the Pomodoro technique. And the Pomodoro technique is basically 25 minutes of focused attention with a 5-minute break on a timer. And I actually sync it up with an audio soundtrack. I use an app called Focus at Will, which are some audio tracks which are designed to help you stay focused. So I'll focus with headphones on for 25 minutes, and I take a forced break, 5-minute break, and then I go back to it again. A friend of mine taught his son this technique who's really struggling with his schoolwork. And they said, okay, 25 minutes of focused attention and then a reward at the end. His son could not believe that he finished his assignment in 25 minutes. It would have taken him hours of struggling and being distracted. Part of the key with that is to take a forced 5-minute break. Because I find sometimes I get into a flow, I want to keep going, and I kind of burn myself out. But I found that to be helpful. It's also helpful to again, just as there are times when you're more naturally concentrated, to time that with your most important work. To identify your peak productivity hours has been very, very helpful for me. And for me, it's the morning. When I can focus and concentrate in the morning, I get a lot more done. There's a lot more if you want to learn more about developing more concentration and focus. A lot of studies here. Sleep, exercise, being in nature, meditation, taking forced breaks, music, looking at your diet, looking at the skillful use of caffeine, all really, really important elements that go into it. And they're really powerful elements. They're kind of the baseline of what's going to help you focus in your life. I found paying attention to sleep and diet and wise use of caffeine to be very, very helpful as I've explored developing more of a concentrated mind in my life. But there's one more little technique I'd like to share. And this is what's called the 5 more rule. Now, whatever you're doing when you're concentrating on something, can you do 5 more minutes focused? And it's a fascinating practice. And I've only been doing this for a little while. As part of it is my research into focus and concentration. But when I'm really working on something and I kind of feel like I'm done, can I do 5 more minutes but narrow my focus? I feel like it's a little bit of a workout, that I'm getting a little more skillful here. So focus and concentration have huge benefits. But it's really important here to point out that a concentrated mind is very, very helpful, but it's not the end point in spiritual practice. It's a very powerful tool. A concentrated mind is a powerful mind. But it's something that you can draw on that's going to support you and help to set the stage for the rest of your practice. And I'd like to share with you a story that really inspired me in terms of cultivating a concentrated mind. And it's a story about a very, very sick monk. And this monk was basically, I don't know what the monk was dying of, but basically his body was falling apart. And it was a really, really, from what I understand from the story, a very hard thing to observe. Because as his body was sort of decaying while he was alive, he had a radiance about him. And the other monks, while they were sort of abhorrent around his physical condition, nonetheless, they were so drawn by how radiant the life force was, just the light coming out of this monk's eyes. And he was asked, what are you doing in your practice that has you so radiant and full of life force? And the monk said something along the lines of this. The monk said, I keep my awareness in and of the body itself, putting aside fear and greed of the world. It's pretty simple here. I keep my awareness in and of the body itself, putting aside fear and greed of the world. How could that lead to radiance? Well, what I've found is that when I'm in a lot of pain, and the most helpful metaphor is when I'm in physical pain, if I can actually allow myself to experience what it's like to keep my awareness in the body in and of itself, putting aside fear and greed for the world, there are these momentary glimpses into being okay. If I can be with physical pain without the mind coming in with a judgment as to good or bad, that's a moment of really very, very powerful clarity. So Can you sense the possibility here? A steadiness of mind that can be present regardless of the fluctuations of the mind. So when I have a migraine, which unfortunately is more than I would like, most of the time I'm miserable, but sometimes I can feel that possibility. Being deeply, deeply present without a label of good or bad, without a label of pleasant or unpleasant. That power of concentration opens up this sort of present moment with a tremendous amount of actual joy to it. And this becomes such an interesting part around concentration practice, is that when you have this capacity to drill deeply into the here and now, when you can sustain attention on the here and now without a label of good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant, what will arise is something called piti, which is a quality of joy. It can feel like an upwelling of pleasantness. So even in the midst of what my mind would call pain, and again, it's only for me glimpses. Sometimes the glimpses are strung together into a period of time. There's just this sense of aliveness. So I'm hoping you get a sense here of how a concentrated mind calls you into presence, and how it begins to set the stage for accessing a quality of pleasantness, a quality of joy that's possible, that's outside of external conditions. And it can begin to be a very powerful tool as you establish awareness in the here and now, as you have like fixated awareness. Then you become aware of what's changing. And the analogy is, imagine you're focusing on a church steeple. All of your attention is on the church steeple. When the mind wanders, you come back to the church steeple. It's hard to say that word over and over and over again. But once you get fixated on the church steeple, there'll be this sort of organic shifting of your attention to become aware of the background. And when you sense the background, you notice, oh my God, there's clouds moving. There's a weather system happening in the background. It's concentration that will begin to reveal your relationship to flow. It'll begin to reveal your relationship to what's changing, where you can begin to see your attitude toward what's changing. That's what's possible in the practice. So there's an element of concentration that's very much laser pointed, but there's another quality that is about softening concentration. I'm going to end here with a little quote from Zhuangzi. And again, a lot of the references here will use the male pronoun. I'll stick with the male pronoun. Think of this in terms of meditation or anything you want in your life. It's not about working harder, but rather about stepping back and gentle focus. Stop trying so hard and instead allow things to happen to you. When an archer is shooting for nothing, he's got all the skill. If he shoots for a brass buckle, he's already nervous. If he shoots for a prize of gold, he goes blind or sees two targets. He's out of his mind. His skill has not changed, but the prize divides him. He cares. He thinks more of winning than shooting, and the need to win drains him of his power. So can you sense this possibility of being deeply concentrated and at the same time being free of desire? This is what starts to open up the mystery, not only in your practice, but in your life. I hope you found this helpful. Best wishes to you in your practice, and I look forward to sharing more with you down the road.